A little background on this one. This is honey lemon tea. It's really Mai Tais, get over it. No. A little background. There's a man named Reekes Adair, William Reekes Adair, who was born in 1914, and he was from a very wealthy old Dallas family whose home had been built in the late 1880s over on Swiss Avenue between Hall and Peak. And he grew up in this wealthy environment. So he was taken on the grand tour of all the national parks that had been created, only maybe 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier. He had an idyllic life. I've read some of the things. But there was something amazing about his background. He grew up to be incredibly handsome, and if you've ever seen the pictures of the young Montgomery Clift before he was in the accident, he was movie star handsome. And he also was brilliant. He got his degree in architecture from SMU, and then he was an air pilot in World War II. And after the war, then he began flying for Pan American Airlines to Central America. So of course, can you imagine anything more glamorous than doing that in the late 40s? So he had the perfect life going, except here was his background. His father had gone insane, and the bedroom furniture in their house on Swiss was all of the era the house was built, which was Victorian. So it was elaborate, heavy wood, and his father had paid to have the legs of all this furniture elevated so that it was like Tweedledum and Tweedledum, way up there, and then he would have whips and whip down on everyone that came near the bed, and he was psychosomatically paralyzed, and he never got out of that bed. So I would say that was disturbing. But it gets worse. His mother, who ironically was Mary Lucy Adair, Mary L. Adair, stepped into the bathroom one day when Reekes was maybe 9, 10, or 11. The powder room in those houses that's under the staircase. And when she didn't come out, he opened the door only to find out that she had slit herself to pieces with razor blade and she was dead. Then his only sibling, Robin, developed this unbelievable form of arthritis where he became so malformed that he ultimately had to be rolled around in a basket, seriously. He was just absolutely gnarled and in agony at all times. So only Reekes had somehow managed to be, without being flip, it's like, I don't remember what it was. Was it in the Addams Family or something where there was the niece or somebody, or maybe it was the Munsters, where there's the niece that's real pretty and normal and nobody seems to realize that she's but he just somehow had beat the system. Except that in 1947, I think it was, 48, 49, whatever, he developed some sort of adult onset acne, from what I'm told. And at that point, he went to a dermatologist on Fitzhugh, right over there, near Turtle Creek. And they did what they were doing then, and that's where they would they would just sort of shoot your face with radium. From what I did a little research on this, it was to dry up maybe the oil glands, whatever. But what happened was the most grotesque thing I've ever heard of. He was forgotten by the nurse, and she forgot him and left him under the radium machine for over an hour. And when she discovered that, there was no apparent damage, but Over the period of months, from what I've told, and I did a little research on this because I knew I was going to tell you this story. I always just knew the story, but not the logic of it. That was the equivalent of his entire face having been microwaved, in which case then the flesh was cooked, and it began rot. It was in agony, he was, and it began rotting and falling off. And finally, from what I understand, he only had bones and was so disfigured that he was let go by Pan American Airlines, even though he had like a fake face that they put on, because they said he didn't represent the image that the company was. He was born too soon, wasn't he? But that's the backstory. Now, let's fast forward to 1961. My mother is working at the Dallas Morning News. She's the book reviewer there. She's now working in advertising, too, because it's been sort of phasing out. And she had a very good friend. Mother had many male friends. I mean, she had many male paramours, too. She loved men. She had men friends. She had men lovers. She just had men, you know. But this was another one of her male friends, and his name was Alan. And Alan's best friend was Reekes. And he told Mother about Reekes, and he asked Mother if he could pay her $50, and this is 1961, to play Beethoven for Reekes, because Reekes loved Beethoven, and he would not leave the house because people would scream. He made Vincent Price in The House of Wax, if any of you've seen that movie, look like a Ralph Lauren model. So in 1961, I'm standing in the hall. Here's the way the house was laid out. Here's the hall. There's the dining room. Big arch into the living room. The living room's long, 20 by 30. And I can see him sitting at the end on the love seat facing Mother, and she's down at this end. I can't see her. She's at the upright piano facing the wall, so she can't see him, and he is not being seen by her. And so I watch, and as she plays Beethoven for him, because he comes in and he has his hat. He had a fedora, and it was pulled way down like this because he was so used to that. And then as he heard the music, he raised his face, and I could see that he had a plastic nose and plastic lips, and his face was a massive number of tiny skin grafts of all colors. It was later explained to me that only because of us dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II did they actually come up with a way to graft skin onto radium burns, and only that allowed him to have any kind of facial coverage at all. So I looked at him, and I could see even across the room that he had handsome eyes, but he was truly terrifying to look at if you were just being objective. And then with the trench coat up and the hat down, and Mother played Beethoven for him, and nothing was ever said. And then he came back. I don't know what arrangements were made or what, but it became a regular thing, and Mother would play Beethoven for him. And more, he got to where he would sit there knowing he was not being seen, even though I was seeing him. And I don't know. There was something, I was profoundly touched by it, but it was macabre. There was no question about it. But what happened was even more peculiar by conventional standards, because they fell in love. And Mother ended up divorcing my father in 1963 and moving in with Reekes, and then in 65 they married. And my father said, I can't compete with Beauty and the Beast. That's what he said. I would have done anything to have kept your mother, but I can't compete with Beauty and the Beast. So at that point, all of Mother's property and possessions go under that roof. And in the divorce, Mother had kept the house because actually she had paid for it. It's a long story, but really. She said to Daddy, you take everything, I'll take the house. You and Harrison, meaning me, can live in the house as long as you want, rent-free. I want nothing. Just, you stay there. That's it. But of course, the house, then she insured her property and so forth and so on. Now we fast forward to 1969. And in 1969, on May the 31st, 1969, the house burned down, which I alluded to in another story in my other show. And I had to make out a long list of what I had lost. It was to this day, to me, the biggest tragedy of my life because my animals burned up in the fire. Because Mother had been disinherited and we were broken off from the rest of the family. I mean, everything was self-contained in that home. So to this day, I have no idea what I looked like at 5, 7, 11. There's no record of it. I have no earthly idea. I have nothing between a bearskin rug and a high school senior picture. Not that I care, but you just can't get these things back. There's no record of your life. Everything is gone. And it turns out that because it was his wife's property, Reekes had insured all of this, and when the insurance came in, much of which was being paid on the contents of the house, which were my father and mine, Reekes took the money and bought a boat, a big boat. Even though he can't be out in the sun because he absolutely could not perspire because he had no glands for it. So it seemed like the ultimate insult, and I made note of it. But now, again, so much background here before I tell you what happened. But in 1973 then, Mother dies. And again, as I alluded in the last story, on Mother's deathbed, she said of Reekes, in conjunction with the house, I've often accused him of it, which was her way of saying I've often accused him of having burned down that house, of having paid to have it burned down, arson. And then all the pieces came together and it made sense to me that that's what had happened. And I told her on the deathbed, I said, I'll kill him. And she said, well, I'd rather you didn't. And then, but it goes on because Mother never said she didn't have a will. And suddenly when she's dead, all of a sudden, the word from his home is that she died without a will. And he told my sister Ann that if we tried to get anything of Mother's or his, he would have me killed, which I took personally. So I decided I'll murder him. It was the only coping mechanism I had. It's like, have you ever had where you're just really so fevered with hatred or anxiety that you just have some sort of a game you play? I think it's why people, we get strung out on Facebook, or people do with video games or something. It's just, or doing crossword puzzles. It's just a coping mechanism. So every day I just couldn't sleep. I was so fevered with hatred of him. Now let's get this straight. He's cheated me out of my fortune twice. He burned down my house, he killed my animals, and he's threatened to kill me. Why wouldn't I at least entertain the thought of killing him? I didn't know it was in me to think about killing someone, but it became a thing. It's like, again, here's an analogy. Many of us have been depressed at times, and we at least get to the point where we understand why somebody thinks about suicide. It's not like we really think about it, and we're not really going to do that. We just get to a point where we really understand how people feel when they absolutely somehow just don't really feel like it's going to get better. And I'd never been so fevered with hatred in my life, and I think with good reason, but it was really frightening how much I hated this man at this point. And I also felt like that he was a threat to my life. So I would fantasize. Every day I'd have a different way I'd fantasize about killing him. And I finally decided the way to do it was with a Jim Beam or Jack Daniels bottle, because they're heavy, thick glass, and they're square. And you'd take it and wear the thing like that, and then I'd go over and ingratiate myself at his home, and I'd go over there, and he was an alcoholic. I knew he'd get smash drunk. Remember the canoe trip? And that when he was staggering to the kitchen or the bathroom, I'd club him, and of course it would look like he fell and killed himself. So this is the one I came up with. And somehow it was a coping mechanism every day to somehow feel like that if I really wanted to kill him, I could. And I'd figured out how to do it. Well, I went over to his house one night. Somehow I was ingratiating myself. I don't know how, but... And I watched, and there was the Jim Beam bottle over there, because I remembered that the way it was in his den, he had the recliner, there was the wine rack, then there was the piano, and then over here is the heavy liquor. He was right between the wine rack and the liquor that were freestanding. So when he got up, I saw there's the Jim Beam bottle, and it was exactly like something in Hitchcock or something, because you're looking at that and you're thinking, if you're going to do this, this is the time to do it. You've got everything going. He's staggering. It's exactly like you planned. And, of course, as luck would have it and good fortune, I remember thinking, if I killed him for revenge, I will have given him my soul. So I thought, damn. So I excused myself and left, and I never saw him again for 17 years. Now, fast forward. I know it's an unlikely scenario, but I'm now, in 1990, I am the couture manager for Northport Neiman Marcus, and Valentino, the designer, is doing a personal appearance, and I'm dressed to the nines and hungover from having taken Valentino to the mansion the night before and drinking martinis, and now I'm trying to be charming to all these rich women that don't really need any of this stuff. So I'm standing there like that, and then all of a sudden these four guys come in all in black, and my assistant says to me, these gentlemen want to see you, and I went over and they said, can you step outside with us? And I went outside, and they said, can you get what you need to get and everything, because we have some questions for you, and we want to take you downtown. And I said, what is this about? And they said, we'll tell you more, but just do this. You need to be discreet about this. So I got in the squad car, and it didn't take me any time at all to learn that in the Reekes had originally moved from the family house on Swiss to Lakewood, right by White Rock, because he felt like the neighborhood over there in that area of Swiss was no longer safe, and he had moved to this lovely house at the corner of Pasadena and Loving. But unfortunately, he had been murdered in that house, and I was the only one they could imagine to have done it. So I'm just, first of all, I'm speechless. And second of all, of course, I just couldn't miss the drama of the moment. I'm having my big Perry Mason moment, where I'm going, well, I didn't kill him, but let me tell you something. I thought about it so many times. I even plotted it. I almost did it. And then I thought, I can't murder him, but let me tell you something. I swear to you, I'm begging you, if you find out who did, give me their address, even if it's prison. And they said, why? I said, I want to send them a thank you note. I said, Lord God, I am a fallen Episcopalian who has become an agnostic, flirting with atheism, and now there's proof there's a God. Someone murdered Reekes. I used to say, please God, murder Reekes, and someone did. Well, the police didn't think it was funny. And my sister was so humorless about it. Oh my God. She absolutely, suddenly, instead of being 5 years older, she was like acting like, you know, the big woman in those Tom and Jerry cartoons going, are you crazy? They don't have any humor down there, you know, the blah, 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 they're, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, of course, I'm the only suspect. Now, it gets better. I go to the funeral. And the funeral, because Reekes was a bona fide atheist, and besides that, he wasn't a very nice person, and he had no friends particularly, and he was a hermit and a miser and a bunch of other stuff, so fill in the blanks. You know. There were probably, I show up, and it's a graveside service. You know, there's the hole, and there's the casket above the hole. And I show up at the funeral. Well, I'm all in black, because, you know, at Neiman's, you had to wear black. You know, it's like, I mean, you put a white collar on, everybody at Neiman's looks like a priest. So I'm walking now down the aisle. It's only like 15 people, so it's like 3 or 4 folding chairs and maybe 5 rows. That are spottily filled, but of course nobody on the front. So I'm now walking down, and the people on the back row turn. And as the people on the back row turn, they all do the thing like, they give me a look like that says, you have a lot of nerve being here since you murdered this man. And I'm realizing, those 4 people think I murdered him. And then the second row turns, and they've all got that look on their face too, like, you have a lot of nerve being here when you're the murderer. And then I'm going like that, and then the third row turns, and you have a lot of nerve. And I'm thinking, this is so inhospitable. God Almighty. Lord God. Just trying to bury the man. So I get now to the front row, and there's no one on the front row, but there's 2 men over there. And those 2 men over there are kind of tall Anglo men in their 40s, early 40s. And I don't know who they are. I've never seen them before. But I do make note that when they turn and see me and our eyes meet, they don't have that look on their face. So I don't make a lot out of that, but I sit down and I go through this very brief ceremony. And then everybody quickly leaves, and I try to stay behind because I'm looking. And now get this, this is where Mother is buried, you see. And so I'm thinking that I would like to stay behind, you know, for a minute. But these guys are having none of it. They're doing a real standoff with me with their eyes, in which case they're making it very clear to me that nothing's going to happen until I leave. So I do the following. I get in my little black 240 Volvo, and I drive away like I'm going away. And as I swing around, I go behind this big, huge embankment of crepe myrtle shrubs. In which case I'm completely concealed, and also it's very dusky by now. The sun is set, but it's not dark. So I'm behind that, and I watch. And if this is the casket, this man is standing here, and this man is standing here. This guy's blonder. And this guy here lifts the casket, and this guy over here reaches inside his jacket and takes something out and puts it in the casket, and this guy lowers it. And then they call to those people that it's time to bury it. So, of course, I call the police and I say, I think the murder weapon is in the casket. And which, of course, then that makes them immediately think. So for a year, I'm followed by the police. I might be, really, I could be anywhere and I could point over, those guys over there from the police, they think I murdered someone. I'd be at Dunstan's eating a steak and there'd be some guys over there and they think I'm the murderer. It was just ruining my dating. Well, I mean, it's not like the people thought I murdered someone. It's just that it's just not something that normally comes up when you're getting to know someone, you know. So, finally, they give up. You know, the house is cordoned off with the obligatory yellow tape. And the truth starts coming out. I find out from my sister, who's got attorneys that have been looking at it and that kind of thing, that it turns out that these two guys had just moved in across the street about 2 years earlier, and amazingly, they're the executors of the will. And they have first approval of all the sales of the property and everything. They're very much alive now, so believe me, I may not do a sequel to this show. But picky, it's been 25 years. So the time finally came when my sister and I get to go into Reekes' house and with the idea that if there's anything of Mother's or something like that we want, we need to take it then. So Ann and I show up there, and believe me, it has been ransacked and there is nothing in that house particularly, but we do what we can. And I'm now down finally in this area, sort of like the little mini connector hall between the kitchen and the dining room, and I'm down on my knees going through a cabinet that is down here real low. I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for anything. I'm just looking, you know. I'm here. I don't know. And all of a sudden I feel these legs come up, and I realize that I'm looking at a knee here. This is the legs, and I look up, and it's the guy, and he's probably easily 6'2", and it's the dark-haired one that was over here that lifted the casket thing. And he said, "Is there something you're looking for?" And I said, "Well, not really." And it was very threatening, his tone. And of course, it wasn't the first time I felt threatened by killers, but... So I finally think, all right, I've got to cut this cord. I mean, I don't know what to do. So here's what I did. I said, "Can I ask you something?" And he said, "What?" I said, "I remember that Reekes was murdered in his Barca Lounger, reclining in his Barca Lounger. He was shot in the sign of the cross, 4 down, 3 across." Another irony, since he was an atheist. And that the wine rack had been right next to him. And he said, "What of it?" I said, "Well, I don't know who murdered Reekes, but I can tell you that I used to fantasize about doing it, and I'm grateful that someone else did. And I don't know who it is, and I never will know who did it, and it doesn't matter, but I'll always be grateful to them." But is there any wine that was in that rack when he was murdered that is still here? And he said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I would love to have it and then serve it at my home to a toast with friends to whoever actually got this man that tried to kill me and robbed me and burned down my house and killed my pets and everything." He said, "You know, really, I don't care who did it. I just somehow want it to be closure for me." And he said, "Well, I think that could be arranged." And he brought this bottle. It had a label on it at the time, but the label was bloodstained. And he gave me this bottle. And as much as I had hated Reekes, and I hope that you can understand that it's certainly not my style to hate someone that much, but this is filed under if not him, who, you know. So they gave me this bottle, and I gave a little dinner party for intimate friends, and we drank this wine, which was really not bad. And we had our little macabre murder dinner party. But I saved a little wine at the bottom with the idea that I would go back to the grave and I would drink that and gloat. And I did. I took this to the grave, and here's really what happened. I looked at that grave, and there was my mother in the middle. She said when she married Reekes, I married into the house of Usher. If you've read, anyone familiar with the Edgar Allan Poe story? That's what she said. So she's buried right there, and she is surrounded by the following: the insane father, the suicide mother, the deformed brother, and the murdered husband, and she's right in the middle. And I'm looking at that, and then I'm thinking, it's not like I'm taking the high road here. I understand that everything he did to me affected me the rest of my life. Seriously. My life would have been very different if he had not burned down the house and cheated me out of a fortune twice, and a million other things. But I did think, who would he have been if he hadn't been deformed? Who would he have been? It's not like that this negates something. But more importantly, I had a very beautiful realization. And that is that when you stand before the grave of an adversary, you've clearly won. But, you're not the victor until you honor them. And so, to my great surprise, I took this bottle, and instead of swigging it and swagger, I took the sip and said, "May you rest in peace on earth as long as time endures."